Alright, so Viktor Orban, the far-right dictator of Hungary, was yet again invited to speak at CPAC, the Conservative Political Action Conference, where he was, unsurprisingly, welcomed with open arms. So, here from Common Dreams, Julia Conley, she says, "We should unite our forces. Orban serves up far-right red meat to a CPAC crowd." So, before we get into some of the statements that he made during this appearance, first, just a little bit of background on who this guy is. So, here from the Times of Israel, to start us off, they say, far-right Hungarian PM Orban decries European race mixing, sparking outrage, and they say, speaking in Romania, Hungary's leader claims that European countries with high level of interracial mixing are no longer nations. No longer nations. Opponents label him as delusional and dangerous, and I think that that's an understatement, but you'll see that as we get into more details here. But first off, just, to start us off on a positive note here, coming out against interracial society in general. So this guy is just openly a Christian nationalist, a white nationalist, kind of in the same vein as people like Marjorie Taylor Greene or Tucker Carlson, who he is, very close buddies with. So here's another aspect of his style of governance, his fascist approach to politics. So here from The Guardian, they say Viktor Orban tells CPAC that the path to power is to have your own media, and he says Hungarian leader also tells Republicans at Budapest conference that shows like Tucker Carlson's should be broadcast 24/7. So again, these guys are basically just doing like an international fascist coalition building type of thing here, and Tucker Carlson has done interviews with this guy. He even went over to Hungary to basically do this entire background piece on Viktor Orban, a fluff piece, and they're coming together and trying to form some sort of a fascist alliance here. But that's just one aspect of this. Again, he is specifically credited Tucker Carlson with doing a great job, but we also have this aspect of it, which is why I call him a dictator. So they say fresh evidence of Hungary vote rigging raises concerns of fraud in European elections. So this guy has actually been committing voter fraud at a widespread level in order to keep himself in power for years now. So as Republicans are coming out here in the United States and pretending as if it's Democrats stealing elections, as they actively try to suppress voting rights in this country, as they actively gerrymander districts specifically along racial lines, as they continue to push forward with their undemocratic approach to politics. In a very similar vein, Viktor Orban here is doing that in Hungary, but at a much higher level, and really this is part of the reason why conservatives want to emulate him, because he does come out and he preaches about similar rhetoric about freedom and family values and all of this good stuff that conservatives like to focus on here in the US, and simultaneously being a complete fucking hypocrite and actively undermining democracy in the process. So now let's go ahead and get into some details about what he actually said at this conference. So again, here from Julia Conley, she says, attacks on LGBTQ people and boasts of stopping an invasion of immigrants were among the remarks that drew loud applause from Republicans attending Hungarian autocrat Viktor Orban's speech at one of the largest annual gatherings of U.S. conservatives Thursday evening, as the Prime Minister told audience members that they should join forces with the far right in other countries to expand their power. And they say progressives in the U.S. and abroad have raised alarm over Orban's ties to the Conservative Political Action Conference, CPAC, which held an auxiliary meeting in Budapest in May, and welcomed the Prime Minister to Dallas days after he gave a speech, again saying that Hungarians do not want to become a mixed race. And they say Orban's own longtime advisor, not even going to try to pronounce this name, Zsuzsa Hegedus, resigned from his government over what she called his pure Nazi rhetoric, which she said was worthy of Nazi propagandist Joseph Goebbels. So again, even people who have previously been working alongside this guy are openly comparing him to Nazi propagandists with the type of rhetoric that he's using and the type of policies that he's been deploying. But they continue here saying the audience in Dallas, however, met Orban with enthusiastic applause as he urged U.S. conservatives to take control of their country, as he has in Hungary. Believe me, they are trying to do pretty much exactly what he's been doing, but they say boasting that we actually built that wall and it stopped illegal immigration, referring to a border fence that his government constructed in 2015 to stop refugees from Syria, Afghanistan, and other countries from entering Hungary. So just a little bit more details on the brutal nature of his border policies here from Vox. They say why Hungary is so awful to refugees. And they say the global refugee crisis is full of horror stories lately. A lot of them seem to be coming from someplace in Europe, Hungary. And they say, quote, people are kept in pens like animals out in the sun without food and water, without any medical assistance, said Human Rights Watch's emergencies director Peter Bokart said in an interview with Al Jazeera. And the country has built razor wire fences on its southern border in Serbia to keep refugees out. And Hungarian officials have been caught on tape flinging food at hungry refugees, and a Hungarian journalist was caught on camera kicking and tripping refugees who were fleeing from the police. And on Wednesday, Hungarian authorities used tear gas and water cannons on refugees, harming many of them, including children. And they say all of this is by design. Prime Minister Viktor Orban has said his goal is to discourage refugees from crossing into Hungary, even at the cost of treating them inhumanely. So obviously has, a significant degree of overlap with people like Donald Trump and even a lot of Joe Biden's policies as well on the border, just being absolutely brutal for the specific sake of being brutal as a, somehow a deterrent method to try to prevent these desperate people from entering the country. Just absolutely disgusting shit here. But they continue in this Common Dreams article saying that Orban, who won his fourth term as prime minister in April in an election that international observers said was unfairly stacked against the opposition, urged Republicans in the U.S. to follow his example as an old-fashioned freedom fighter. As he said, the two countries must fight progressives who want to separate Western civilization from its Judeo-Christian heritage. Okay, kind of interesting again for somebody who is an open Christian nationalist to be pushing the same type of rhetoric that you hear from guys like Ben Shapiro about the Judeo-Christian heritage of this country, as if that's the style of governance that even the founding fathers wanted for this country. It's just straight up not. But either way, he's still using this rhetoric of being a freedom fighter while actively suppressing freedoms in every way fucking imaginable, right? Whether it's freedom of movement with refugees who need to enter the country from a lot of places that are like war torn and having devastation economically and having famines and all of these different things. Obviously restricting freedom in that sense, also restricting freedom of the press, where he has brutally cracked down and basically has, in the words of himself, is trying to, tell the United States to do what he's been doing and just fully controlling the media, because it's very hard to have some sort of an opposition to yourself if you have that unilateral control over the media. Obviously suppressing freedoms in many different capacities, but still using this rhetoric similar to how conservatives do here in the United States, insisting that they're somehow the ones who believe in freedom while actively crushing it every chance that they get. But they continue here with a quote from Viktor Orban saying, "Let's be honest, the most evil things in modern history were carried out by people who hated Christianity." And he said those horrors of Nazis and communists happened because some Western states in continental Europe abandoned that Christian values, and today's progressives are planning to do the same. So honestly, not even really sure what the fuck he's talking about here. I'm no historian, but I'm pretty sure that the Nazis were focused on a different religion and ethnicity of people. It was the Jewish people, and him saying that somehow like the entire Nazi project or like Stalinism or whatever was specifically centered around persecuting Christians instead of a lot of other marginalized groups that they were going after. It's just like kind of just incoherent rambling here, but again, what could you expect from somebody who openly identifies as a Christian nationalist? But they continue here saying Orban's defense of the so-called Western value of protecting children from gender ideology. He's really just kind of ripping, conservatives' shtick here, but came out against gender ideology and received a standing ovation as the prime minister waded into the current U.S. culture war over discussions about race and gender in the nation's schools. And he said, "The mother is a woman, the father is a man, leave our kids alone, full stop, end of discussion." Whatever the fuck that means. Again, conservatives coming out right now using similar rhetoric to this, insisting that, any LGBTQ presence in any child's life is somehow like grooming and is going to magically turn them gay or whatever the fuck. Basically just using this as an opportunity to prosecute or to crack down on LGBTQ rights and, make these people out to be basically a scapegoat, similar to how conservatives treat immigrants and stuff like that, similar, in the same capacity as Viktor Orban, just creating scapegoats to try to distract and divide people while they continue with their authoritarian creep and, continue to push a lot of policies that are disastrous for average people's lives. But they finish off here with a quote from Bernie Sanders, who I think summarized it pretty well and, even gave some advice in terms of what we should be doing in an international leftist capacity. So He said we must look honestly at how that order has failed to deliver on many of its promises and how authoritarians have adeptly exploited those failures in order to build support for their agenda. And he says our job is to build on our common humanity and do everything that we can to oppose all of these forces. We know that those forces work together across borders, and we must do the same. So I think he's 100% right here. And listen, again, at the end of the day, this is fascist international solidarity. And it's kind of ironic because somebody like Viktor Orban loves to rail against what he calls the globalists. And listen, I mean, at the end of the day, there's plenty of criticisms that you could have for globalization, especially here in the United States, where a lot of our domestic manufacturing jobs were exported overseas to go exploit cheap labor by multinational corporations and stuff. There's plenty of valid substantive criticisms of globalism, but when people like Viktor Orban use the word globalism, they really just mean like some conspiracy about an international leftist Jewish coalition that is trying to suppress their freedoms and target Christians or whatever the fuck. So he's just using that as language to try to justify the same policies that he has been, which are again pretty much perfectly what the conservative party here in the United States wants to emulate. So this guy is an absolute monumental piece of shit. Doesn't even really need to be said. He's against race mixing. He is violently cracking down on protesters, violently cracking down on the media, rigging elections, doing all of these various things that conservatives would again love to implement here in the United States. So it's important to recognize that they are forming these international coalitions along ideological lines, and so we as socialists, we as leftists should do the exact same thing and try in whatever capacity that we have to stand in solidarity with new leftist governments that have been elected recently, especially in Latin America. We've seen the elections of people like Pedro Castillo and Gabriel Boric and Lula da Silva potentially coming up in Brazil, all of these different elections that have taken place over the last couple of months and years. So we need to stand in solidarity with those coalitions in the same way that the far right is standing in solidarity with each other, or else we are going to end up with a situation where conservatives are actively going to be pushing us in the same exact direction as Viktor Orban's government is going, and we are not going to have any broad coalition in order to push back against that rise of far right fake populism on the global stage.